Let's start by calculating compound interest using a table. Now, we've already looked at simple interest and you've seen that you can calculate it using this formula. Interest equals the principal times the rate times the number of time periods that you're looking at. Now, with compound interest, it's a little bit different. We calculate the interest just for one time period at a time. And that means we let n equal 1 and we just work out the interest for 1 year, 1 week, 1 month, whatever the time period is. Now, we then have to add it to the principal so that we can see how much is owing once we have the principal plus the interest at the end of that time period. But then in the second time period, instead of just calculating interest on the original amount that's borrowed in the beginning, we calculate interest on the balance that we owed at the end of the first period. And then in the second time period, we actually use the balance that was owing at the end of the first time period as the starting point, and we do it all over again. We work out the interest for a year, we add it to what we owed at the start of the year to see what we owe at the end of the year, or the time period, the week, month, whatever it is we're dealing with. And then in the third time period, we start with the closing balance at the end of the second, and so on. So it builds up. We end up with interest on interest, and that means that you end up owing a lot more if you're owing money, or saving a lot more if it's a savings account. It doesn't look like much in the beginning, but over time, it adds up to make figures much, much bigger. So let's look at an example. Now, we're borrowing $100 here on the 1st of the 1st, 2022. And there's an interest rate of 10%, that means per annum, which is each year, and it's compounded yearly. Now, it's important to know how often you're going to compound it because that's another row that you're going to need on your table. Now, the question says, how much do we owe after 5 years? So the table starts on the 1st of the 1st, 22. That's the first date that we borrow that $100. And the opening balance is 100. Now, this is the amount that we owe. So it's not money we have in the bank. It's the amount that we owe somebody. So here we can see that all the way down this column, we have to figure out interest, and we need to use the simple interest formula to do it. Because we're only doing it for one time period, n is equal to 1. So really we just have to start with our starting figure, our principal, and multiply it by our rate of 10%. Now you can use your percentage button on your calculator by hitting shift and then the bracket and put it in as 10%, or you could put 10 100ths, or you could put 0.1. They'll all do the same thing. So we start out owing $100, and then we say here, well, how much interest will we be charged on that $100 in the first year? Well, 100 times 10% gives us $10. So we write that down. So then by the end of that first year, we not only owe the $100 that we borrowed in the beginning, we now owe $10 of interest as well. So we add these two amounts together to get $110. Now, if that is what was owing at the end of 2022, at the start of 2023, it makes sense that we have to open with that same amount. We owe $110 now, so that amount comes down to here. Now we have to calculate our interest again, but instead of calculating it on that original $100 that we borrowed, it's almost like we treat each year or each time period like a new loan. And we say, right, you owe $110. I'm going to charge you interest. How much? 10%. So we say, well, how much is that? Well, what is 10% of is times, what is 10% of 110? And your calculator should tell you it's $11. So at the end of that year, you started out owing $110, but you've been charged $11 interest for having the loan. So you add these two amounts together and now you owe $121. Now, whatever you finish with at the end of 1 year, that's what you start with at the beginning of the next year. So then when you calculate your interest this year, you say, right, you owe $121. We need to find 10% of that. And we get $12.10. Now you'll notice that the interest amounts are going up a little bit each time. And that's because we're calculating interest based on what's owing now, not on what we borrowed in the beginning. And it looks like only a small increase here, but it adds up over time to make quite a big difference. So here, adding these together, we get our $133.10, which comes down to the next row. We multiply that by 10%, or find 10% of it to get our $13.31, then add these together to get this. This comes down again. And at the start of this fifth year, we're owing $146.41. 10% of that is $14.64. We add those two amounts together to find that at the end of 5 years, we owe $161.05. So that's our answer at the start of the next year, which is exactly 5 years. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's what we would be owing on that date. Let's think about what would have happened if this wasn't a compound interest situation, but if instead we'd just been charged 10% of $100 every time for those 5 years. Well, we would have been charged $10 5 times. That's $50. So we would have owed the $100 we borrowed, plus 50, we'd be owing $150. So it wouldn't be quite as much as it would be with this compound interest.